It was here on October 24, 1994, where Jamie Ann Moore's body was discovered, along the railroad tracks between Morrilton and Plummerville. The state medical examiner's office ruled her death a homicide, but despite extensive investigative work, identity remained a mystery for decades. Conway County Sheriff Mike Smith says he wasn't even with the department when the case began.
A woman's body, dumped in a California desert. No ID, no name, no one looking for her in the right state. For 46 years, she was nobody, just another Jane Doe in a system full of ghosts. Until DNA finally whispered her name. But what it revealed was even stranger than the silence. Welcome to Silent Cases. In today's case, we're covering the two-state ghost, Victoria Hargrove's 46-year mystery. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these untold stories alive. Now, let's get into it. January 28, 1980, Opelika, Alabama. A quiet southern town where everyone knows everyone. Victoria Jean Hargrove, 29 years old, vanishes from her home. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Her family waited, searched, prayed, but Victoria never came home. 3 weeks later, February 18, 1980, over 2,000 miles away, motorists driving through the scorching desert of Palm Desert, California, spot something in a ravine. A body. A woman, white, estimated age 20 to 25 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, around 115 pounds. But here's the problem. Investigators ran her fingerprints. Nothing. Dental records? Dead end. No missing persons report matched her description in California. She became just another file, another number. Riverside County Jane Doe. The case was labeled a homicide, but authorities couldn't even determine how she died. Cold case reviews in 2008, then 2009 turned up nothing. For nearly half a century, she had no name, no story, no justice. Until 2025. In 2025, Riverside County investigators partnered with Othram, a cutting-edge forensic DNA lab. They built a DNA profile from her remains. California's Department of Justice ran the match, and finally, after 46 years, they had a name. Victoria Jean Hargrove, the woman from Opelika, Alabama who disappeared on January 28, 1980. But here's where it gets even stranger. How did Victoria travel from Alabama to California in just 3 weeks? Who was she with? And most haunting of all, what killed her? Investigators still don't know. The identification solved one mystery, but opened a dozen more. She disappeared from Alabama on January 28, 1980. Her body turned up in Palm Desert, California on February 18, 1980. And it took nearly 46 years for DNA to finally give her name back. But the truth? The truth is still buried somewhere between 2 states and 46 years of silence. If you're haunted by Victoria's story as we are, hit that like button right now. And if you know anyone from Opelika, Alabama or Palm Desert, California who might remember something from 1980, share this video. Sometimes the smallest detail can crack a case wide open. Your share could be the one that brings justice to Victoria. To understand why cases like Victoria Hargrove's are suddenly being solved after decades of silence, we need to talk about how DNA identification actually works, and more importantly, how it changed. For years, law enforcement relied on traditional DNA databases. The system was simple. You had DNA from a crime scene or from unidentified remains, you ran it through a database like CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, and you hoped for a direct match. If the person's DNA was already in the database, maybe from a previous arrest or a military record, you got a hit. Case closed. But if their DNA wasn't in the database, you had nothing. The case went cold. The body stayed unidentified. The file gathered dust. That's how Victoria Jean Hargrove remained Riverside County Jane Doe for 46 years. Her DNA wasn't in any database, Her fingerprints led nowhere. Her dental records matched no missing persons report. She was a ghost in the system. But forensic genetic genealogy changed everything. This technique doesn't look for direct matches. Instead, it takes a completely different path. Investigators generate a genealogical-style DNA profile from the unknown remains. Then they search for relatives in genealogy databases that permit law enforcement searches. Not exact matches, relatives, distant cousins, third cousins twice removed, people who share fragments of DNA with the unknown person. Once they find those relatives, they start building family trees. They work backward through generations, mapping out bloodlines, tracing marriages, births, deaths. They narrow down the possibilities. They follow the branches until they land on a name that fits the timeline, the geography, the physical description. Then they confirm it, sometimes through additional DNA testing with surviving family members, sometimes through other records. But the genealogy work is what gets them there. The Department of Justice policy describes this as Forensic Genetic Genealogy Searching, or FGGSS. It's a formal investigative technique that requires careful scientific, investigative, and prosecutorial judgment. It's not a magic button. It's a process, a meticulous, time-consuming, expensive process. But it works. And that's why cases that seemed impossible to solve are suddenly closing. The public first learned how powerful this approach could be in 2018 when investigators used forensic genetic genealogy to identify the Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo had terrorized California for decades. He committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries between 1974 and 1986. And then he disappeared into suburban anonymity. For more than 30 years, he lived as a normal retiree in Sacramento County. No one suspected him. Traditional DNA databases had nothing on him because he'd never been arrested for his crimes. But when investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to a public genealogy site, they found distant relatives. They built a family tree. They zeroed in on DeAngelo. And in April 2018, they arrested him. The case exploded across the media. People couldn't believe it. This man had evaded capture for decades, and a genealogy website helped bring him down. It felt like science fiction. But here's what's important. The Golden State Killer case was about catching a suspect. It was about justice for victims who had names, families, communities that remembered them. It was about stopping a monster. The current wave of cases is different. Now, forensic genetic genealogy is increasingly being used to restore identities to Jane Does and John Does, people who died nameless, people whose families didn't know where they were, people who were buried as unknowns, their graves marked with numbers instead of names. And that's why this category now performs so well as true crime content. Because it's not just about solving a mystery, it's about returning someone's humanity. It's about a family finally getting answers after decades of wondering. It's about a person who was erased from the world suddenly being remembered again. Mystery, science, grief, and closure all sit in one story, and viewers can't look away. This trend is reflected in the sheer number of fresh identifications being announced in 2026. Across several states, agencies are partnering with labs like Othram to tackle their coldest cases, the ones that seemed unsolvable, the ones where every traditional method had failed. Victoria Jean Hargrove in California, Yadizia Jones in Tennessee, Timothy Mitchell Williams in Georgia, Jamie Ann Moore in Arkansas, Jeanette Marcotte in Florida, William Thomas Green in Tennessee, and Ronald Joe Cole connecting California to Illinois. All of them were ghosts, and now all of them have names again.
The emotional weight of these stories is immense. When investigators announce an identification, they're not just closing a case file. They're giving a family the ability to grieve properly. They're allowing a person to be mourned as themselves, not as a Jane Doe or John Doe. And the public responds to that hard. These stories get shared. They get millions of views. They spark conversations about science, about justice, about how many other people are still out there waiting to be named. Because if Victoria Hargrove waited 46 years, how many others are still waiting? Pause for just 5 seconds and think about that. How many Jane and John Does are still out there? How many families are still waiting? If that thought sends chills down your spine, smash that like button and leave a comment with just one word: justice. Let's flood the comments and show that we care about the nameless. Every comment pushes this video to more people who might have information about unsolved cases. Let's break down exactly how this process works, step by step, so you understand what investigators are actually doing when they say they used forensic genetic genealogy. Step 1. Unknown remains are found. Could be skeletal, could be decomposed, could be in a ravine, a wooded area, alongside railroad tracks, in a creek. Doesn't matter. What matters is that traditional identification methods have failed. No fingerprints, no dental match, no missing persons report that lines up. Step 2. DNA extraction. Forensic scientists extract whatever usable DNA they can from the remains. Sometimes it's degraded, sometimes it's partial, sometimes it's been sitting in an evidence locker for 40 years. But modern labs can work with incredibly small or damaged samples. Step 3. SNP-style profile generation. This is where it gets technical, but stay with me. Instead of generating a traditional forensic DNA profile, which looks at specific markers used in criminal databases, the lab generates a profile similar to what you'd get from a consumer genealogy test. Think 23andMe or Ancestry DNA. They're looking at single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, across the genome. These are the markers that show ancestry and family relationships. Step 4. Genealogy search. The lab uploads that profile to genealogy databases that permit law enforcement searches. Not all databases allow this. Some, like GED Match, have specific policies. Others don't allow law enforcement use at all. But the ones that do can show matches to distant relatives, people who share small percentages of DNA with the unknown person. Step 5. Distant relatives. This is where the real detective work begins. The genealogist looks at the list of DNA matches, maybe a third cousin, maybe a fourth cousin twice removed, maybe several distant relatives who all connect back to a common ancestor from the 1800s. The genealogist has to figure out how all these people are related to each other and to the unknown person. Step 6. Family tree reconstruction. The genealogist builds out family trees for each of the DNA matches, working backward through generations. They use census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, military records, newspaper archives, anything they can find. They map out entire family lines. They identify common ancestors. They trace the branches forward to see which descendants fit the profile of the unknown person. Step 7. Narrowing it down. Once they have possible candidates, they compare them against what's known about the remains: age, height, weight, geographic location, timeline. If the remains were found in California in 1980 and the person disappeared from Alabama in 1980, that's a match worth investigating. If the ages don't line up, they move on. Step 8. Confirmation. Once they have a strong candidate, they need to confirm it. Sometimes they can get DNA from surviving family members and compare it directly. Sometimes they use other records to build a definitive case, but they don't announce an identification until they're certain. The Department of Justice policy specifically frames FGGS as an approach meant to guide investigative decisions in these hard cases. It's not a standalone solution, it's a tool that leads investigators in the right direction, and then they have to do the work to confirm it. This technique matters for one simple reason. It can work even when there is no direct database hit, no fingerprint match, and no dental identification. Traditional methods rely on the unknown person already being in a system somewhere. Their prints in APHIS, their DNA in CODIS, their dental records on file, their face in a missing persons database. But what if they were never fingerprinted? What if they were never arrested? What if they never went to a dentist who kept records? What if no one reported them missing because their family didn't know they were gone? That's where the system breaks down. That's where Jane Does and John Does happen. And that's exactly why forensic genetic genealogy has become so valuable. Because it doesn't need the person to be in a database, it just needs distant relatives to be in a database. And with millions of people having taken consumer genealogy tests, the odds of finding at least a few distant relatives are better than ever. That's why it worked for Victoria Jean Hargrove, why it worked for Yedesia Jones, why it worked for Jamie Ann Moore, William Thomas Green, and Ronald Joe Cole. Traditional methods had failed them all, for years, for decades. But forensic genetic genealogy gave them their names back. And that's why this technique is revolutionizing cold case investigations across the country. If you found this science fascinating, click that subscribe button right now because we're going to keep bringing you the cases where cutting-edge technology meets cold case mysteries. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we solve another impossible case. Science is bringing the dead back to life, one name at a time, and you're going to want to be here for every single identification. Sulphur Creek Road, Nashville, Tennessee, September 8th. 2018. A woman's remains are discovered in northwest Davidson County. The area is quiet, suburban, not the kind of place where you expect to find a body. But there she is. She's wearing Vanderbilt-branded clothing, a Vanderbilt shirt maybe, something that connects her to the university or to Nashville's college culture. It's a distinctive detail, the kind of thing that should make identification easier. So investigators give her a name, not her real name because they don't know it yet, but a placeholder, a way to refer to her in reports, in press releases, in the files that will sit on desks for years. Vandy Jane Doe. They run her prints, nothing. They check dental records, no match. They look through missing persons reports. No one fits. For years, she's just Vandy Jane Doe, a woman in Vanderbilt clothing found on Sulphur Creek Road. A question mark, a mystery. Until 2026. Othram, the Forensic Genealogical Genetic Lab, announces that Vandy Jane Doe has been identified. Her name is Yedesia Jones. She was born in 1993. She was 25 years old when she died. But the identification doesn't close the case, because investigators still don't know how she died. They don't know who left her remains on Sulphur Creek Road. They don't know why she was there in the first place. The investigation into her death remains ongoing. And that's the thing about these cases. Sometimes DNA gives you a name, but it doesn't give you the whole story. Yedesia Jones is no longer a Jane Doe. She's been returned to her family, to her identity, to the world. But the questions around her death are still unanswered. Lawrenceville, Georgia, February 10, 2025. Construction workers are doing their job near Northside Hospital, Gwinnett, close to where Highway 316 and Highway 120 intersect. It's a busy area, urban, developed. And then they find bones. Skeletal remains. Human. Buried or hidden in a spot that's about to become part of a new development. Investigators are called in. The remains are collected, examined. Forensic analysis suggests they've been there for a while, years at least. But who is this person? Local officials team up with Othram in March 2025, just a month after the discovery. They want answers quickly. They want to know who this person was, how they ended up here, whether foul play was involved. The DNA work begins, the genealogy search, the family tree reconstruction. And in 2026, they have a name. Timothy Mitchell Williams. He was 57 years old when he went missing in 2020. He was last known to be alive on July 18, 2020, just 5 years before his remains were found. 5 years, not 46, not 60.
5. And yet, without forensic genetic genealogy, he might have stayed unidentified for decades. Because traditional methods weren't working, his remains were skeletal, no ID on him, no clear cause of death immediately apparent, no missing persons report that connected the dots quickly enough. But DNA brought him home. Now investigators can focus on what happened to him, how he died, why he ended up near that highway, whether someone put him there or whether his death was something else entirely. Conway County, Arkansas, October 24, 1994. A woman's body is found along railroad tracks near U.S. Highway 64 between the towns of Morrilton and Plumerville. It's a rural stretch, isolated, the kind of place where a body can go unnoticed for a while. But she's found, and she's examined. The Arkansas State Medical Examiner rules the death a homicide. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't natural causes. Someone killed her. But who was she? Investigators run through the usual methods: fingerprints, dental records, missing persons databases. They come up empty. She becomes another Jane Doe, another file, another cold case. Years pass. Decades. In September 2023, nearly 30 years after her body was found, Arkansas authorities begin working with Othram. They want to try forensic genetic genealogy. They want to give this woman a name. The process takes time. DNA extraction from remains that old can be difficult. The genealogy work is painstaking, but they push forward. And in 2026, more than 31 years after her body was found, authorities make an announcement. The woman found along those railroad tracks has been identified. Her name is Jamie Ann Moore. She was from Conway, Arkansas. She was 32 years old when she was killed. 32 years old. A whole life ahead of her. And someone took it. Now her family knows what happened to her. They know where she is. They can mourn her properly. Bury her under her real name. Remember her as Jamie, not as Jane Doe. But the homicide investigation is still open, because DNA gave her identity, but it didn't give her her killer. Someone out there knows what happened to Jamie Ann Moore in October 1994, and investigators are still looking for answers. If you're from Conway, Arkansas, or the Morrilton area, and you remember anything about October 1994, leave a comment below. Maybe you saw something, maybe you heard something, maybe a detail that seemed insignificant at the time could be the missing piece. Jamie's killer is still out there. Your memory could bring justice. Drop it in the comments. The investigators are watching. Malabar, Florida, January 1985. Skeletal remains are found in a densely wooded area in Brevard County, a town southeast of Orlando on the Atlantic coast. The area is swampy, overgrown, the kind of place where remains can go unnoticed for a long time. The remains are female, but beyond that, investigators have little to go on. No ID, no clear cause of death, no missing persons report that matches. She becomes another Jane Doe. Decades pass, and then in 2026, forensic genetic genealogy gives her a name: Jeanette Marcotte. But here's where the case gets interesting, because Jeanette wasn't from Florida. According to Othram's case page, she had been reported missing from Vancouver, British Columbia. But later, Canadian reporting adds another detail. She was last seen in Saskatchewan around 1981 or 1982, and she was believed to be heading to Vancouver. So the timeline is complicated. She was last seen in Saskatchewan around 1981 or 1982. She was reported missing from Vancouver at some point after that, and her remains were found in Malabar, Florida in January 1985. That's a journey. Saskatchewan to Vancouver to Florida, across Canada and down into the United States, thousands of miles. And investigators still don't know how or why she made that journey. They don't know what brought her to Florida. They don't know who she was with or what happened to her. The identification answered one question, but it opened a dozen more. And that's the reality of these cases. DNA can tell you who someone was, but it can't always tell you their story. East Miller Cove, Blount County, Tennessee, April 4, 1981.
A hunter is walking through the woods just south of Knoxville. It's spring, the kind of day when you're out enjoying nature, looking for game, not expecting to stumble across anything horrifying. But then he finds it. A body. A man's body. Decomposed, partially skeletal, hidden in the dense brush of East Miller Cove. The hunter calls authorities. They come out, recover the remains, begin the investigation. Forensic work starts immediately. They need to know who this person is, when they died, how they died. The examination suggests the man had likely died sometime between 1977 and 1980, so by the time he was found in April 1981, he'd already been there for at least a year, possibly longer. But who was he? No ID on the body, no wallet, no distinctive jewelry or clothing that could identify him. Investigators check missing persons reports. They run what forensic identifiers they can. Nothing matches. He becomes another John Doe, a man in the woods, a mystery. More than 4 decades pass, 40 years of being nameless, 40 years of lying in an unmarked grave or stored in an evidence facility, 40 years of his family not knowing what happened to him. Until March 2025, when Tennessee authorities decide to partner with Othram. They want to try forensic genetic genealogy. They want to finally give this man his name back. The DNA work begins. The profile is built. The genealogy search starts. Family trees are reconstructed, branches traced, timelines compared, and in 2026, they have an answer. His name is William Thomas Green. He was born March 29, 1942. He was originally from the Knoxville area, and according to relatives, he was last seen in Knoxville around 1977. That lines up perfectly with the forensic estimate that he died between 1977 and 1980. He disappeared around 1977, and within a few years, he was dead in East Miller Cove. But here's the thing. His family hadn't reported him missing, or if they had, the report never connected to the John Doe case. Maybe they thought he'd just moved away. Maybe they'd lost touch with him. Maybe they assumed he didn't want to be found. Whatever the reason, William Thomas Green spent more than 40 years as a nameless body in the Tennessee woods. Now he has his identity back. Now his family knows what happened to him. Now they can mourn him properly. But investigators still don't know exactly how he died or why he ended up in East Miller Cove. The investigation continues. Fillmore, California, May 1st, 1965. Ronald Joe Cole, 19 years old, vanishes. One day he's there, the next day he's gone. No goodbye, no note, no explanation. His family searches. They file a missing persons report. They wait for news. But Ronald never comes home. And then, more than a year later, in 1966, something strange happens. Geneseo, Illinois, hundreds of miles away from California, a rural area, a creek. Someone finds skeletal remains, a young man. The body is recovered, examined, but there's no ID, no connection to any missing persons case in Illinois. He becomes Geneseo John Doe. For decades, no one connects the dots. No one realizes that Geneseo John Doe might be Ronald Joe Cole from California. Why would they? This is 1966. No national missing persons databases, no DNA technology, no way to cross-reference cases across state lines. So, Ronald stays missing in California. Geneseo John Doe stays unidentified in Illinois. 2 separate mysteries, 2 separate families grieving. Nearly 60 years pass. And then, in 2026, advanced DNA work finally connects the 2 cases. Geneseo John Doe is Ronald Joe Cole, the 19-year-old who vanished from Fillmore, California in May 1965, ended up dead in Illinois in 1966. But how? Why? Who took him there? Forensic examination reveals something chilling. Ronald died from a gunshot wound to the head. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't a tragic misadventure. Someone shot him, someone killed him, and someone transported his body from California to Illinois, or killed him in Illinois after taking him there. And according to Fox 11 reporting, investigators had previously identified a suspect, David Lefevre, Ronald's half-brother. Lefevre was considered the main suspect in Ronald's disappearance, but he was never charged. The evidence wasn't strong enough, or the case wasn't solid enough, or something fell through. and then Lefevre died. So even though DNA finally gave Ronald his name back, even though investigators now know he was murdered, the person they believe killed him is already gone. There will be no trial, no conviction, no justice in the traditional sense. Just answers, just closure, just a family finally knowing what happened to their son, their brother, after nearly 60 years of wondering. Take a moment and let that sink in. 60 years. Ronald's family waited 60 years to know what happened to him, and even with the answer, there's no justice. If that breaks your heart like it breaks ours, hit that like button and share this video. Every share is a tribute to Ronald and every other victim still waiting for their story to be told. Don't scroll past. Share for Ronald. Out of all the cases we've talked about, Victoria Jean Hargrove's story stands out. Not because it's more tragic than the others, not because her family suffered more, but because her case combines everything that makes these stories so compelling. An exact disappearance date, January 28, 1980. Not sometime in the late 70s, not around 1980. An exact date, a timestamp, a moment when everything changed. A cross-country geographic mystery. She disappeared from Opelika, Alabama. Her body turned up in Palm Desert, California. Over 2,000 miles away, 3 weeks later. How did she get there? Who was she with? Why California? A long period of anonymity, 46 years, nearly half a century of being Riverside County Jane Doe, nearly half a century of her family not knowing where she was or what happened to her. And an unresolved death investigation, because even though DNA gave Victoria her name back, it didn't answer the biggest questions. How did she die? Was she murdered? Did she die of natural causes? Was it an accident? Investigators still don't know.
And that combination, that blend of solved and unsolved, makes Victoria's case the perfect emotional spine for this video. Because it gives you both a victory and a mystery, both closure and an open question, both an ending and a beginning. DNA gave her identity back, but the story isn't over. Let's be very clear about what the identification did and didn't answer. What it answered. Who was Riverside County Jane Doe? Victoria Jean Hargrove, 29 years old, from Opelika, Alabama. Disappeared January 28, 1980. That's huge. That's everything to her family. That's the difference between mourning a stranger and mourning their daughter, their sister, their loved one. But here's what it didn't answer. How did Victoria get from Opelika, Alabama to Palm Desert, California in just 3 weeks? Did she go willingly? Was she running from something? Was she traveling with someone? Was she taken against her will? The distance is more than 2,000 miles. That's not a short trip. That's a cross-country journey. In 1980, before cell phones, before GPS, before easy internet tracking, you could vanish on a road trip and no one would know where you went. But why Palm Desert specifically? Why that ravine? Why that spot? And the biggest question of all, what caused her death? The original investigation in 1980 labeled it a homicide, but authorities could not determine the cause of death. The remains were too decomposed, the evidence was too limited. Cold case reviews in 2008 and 2009 looked at the case again. Still nothing. No new leads, no new forensic breakthroughs. And even now, in 2026, after DNA has identified her, investigators still don't have a definitive answer about how she died. Was she strangled, shot, stabbed, poisoned? Did she die of exposure? Did someone dump her body there after killing her somewhere else? They don't know. And that unresolved gap is one of the most powerful parts of this story, because it means the investigation isn't over. It means there are still answers to find. It means someone out there might know something. Here's how you frame this in the video. DNA gave Victoria Jean Hargrove her name back, but nearly 46 years later, investigators still do not know exactly how she ended up dead in a ravine in Palm Desert, California, after vanishing from Opelika, Alabama. That sentence does everything you need it to do. It acknowledges the victory. DNA solved part of the mystery. She's no longer Jane Doe. It emphasizes the time, 46 years, nearly half a century. That's longer than many viewers have been alive. And it leaves the door open, because the biggest questions are still unanswered.
And that's what keeps viewers engaged. That's what makes them comment. That's what makes them share the video and come back for updates. Because they want to know what happened to Victoria. They want the full story. They want justice. And as long as those questions remain unanswered, the story stays alive. Drop your theory in the comments right now. What do you think happened to Victoria? Did she leave Alabama willingly? Was she running from something? Was she taken? We read every single comment, and sometimes our viewers piece together details that investigators miss. Your theory could matter. Comment now before you forget. Let's crowdsource this mystery together. Let's talk about why these cases go viral, why they rack up millions of views, why they get shared across social media, why people can't stop talking about them. It comes down to a formula, a 4-part structure that hits every emotional and intellectual button a true crime audience has. Part 1, a mystery. Someone is unidentified. Someone has been nameless for years, for decades. There's a question that needs answering. Who is this person? That's the hook. That's what pulls people in, because humans are wired to want answers. We see a mystery and we need to solve it. Part 2, a scientific reveal. The mystery gets solved through cutting-edge technology, forensic genetic genealogy, DNA analysis, family tree reconstruction. It's not just luck, it's not just good detective work, it's science. And people love that. They love seeing technology used for good. They love understanding how the process works. They love the idea that science can reach back decades and solve cases that seemed impossible. Part 3, a human identity. The reveal isn't just about closing a case file. It's about restoring someone's name, about returning them to their family, about making them a person again instead of a Jane Doe or John Doe. That's the emotional core. That's what makes people cry. That's what makes this more than just an intellectual puzzle. Because everyone can imagine how it would feel to lose someone and not know where they are. Everyone can imagine the relief of finally getting answers after decades of wondering. Part 4, a moral or emotional aftermath. The identification doesn't always solve everything. Often it raises new questions. What happened to this person? Who killed them? Why? And that gives the story legs. It keeps the conversation going. It turns one video into a series. It keeps viewers coming back. That structure is present in every case we've talked about. Victoria Jean Hargrove. Mystery, who is Riverside County Jane Doe? Science, forensic genetic genealogy. Identity, Victoria, 29, from Alabama. Aftermath, how did she die? How did she get to California? Yedezia Jones. Mystery, who is Vandy Jane Doe? Science, DNA analysis. Identity, Yedezia, 25, born 1993. Aftermath, how did she die? Who left her on Sulphur Creek Road? Wina Jane Moore. Mystery, who is the woman on the railroad tracks? Science, genealogy search. Identity, Jamie, 32, from Conway. Aftermath, who killed her? William Thomas Green. Mystery, who is the man in East Miller's Cove? Science, DNA matching. Identity, William, last seen 1977. Aftermath, what happened to him? Ronald Joe Cole. Mystery, who is Geneseo John Doe? Science, advanced DNA work. Identity, Ronald, 19, missing from California. Aftermath, his half-brother was the suspect, but he's dead. Every single one follows the formula, and every single one performs. Here's something interesting about true crime content. Stories about catching suspects perform well, no question. People love seeing criminals brought to justice. They love seeing cold cases solved. They love seeing evil punished. But Jane Doe and John Doe identification stories hit differently. Because they're not just about justice, they're about humanity. An arrest story is satisfying. It has a clear good guy and bad guy. It has a resolution. The criminal gets caught. Case closed. Feel-good ending.
But a Jane Doe or John Doe identification story adds something deeper. It's about the restoration of identity after years or decades of erasure. Think about what it means to be a Jane Doe, to be buried in an unmarked grave, to be referred to by a number or a location, to be forgotten by the world because the world doesn't even know who you are. It's a kind of death beyond death. You're not just gone, you're unnamed, unremembered, unknown.
And when DNA gives that person their name back, it's not just solving a case, it's reversing that erasure. It's saying you mattered, you were a person, you had a family, you had a life, and you deserve to be remembered. That's powerful. In cases like Jamie Ann Moore and William Thomas Green, the public reveal is not only about evidence, it's about a person no longer being Jane Doe or John Doe. Jamie is no longer the woman on the railroad tracks. She's Jamie Ann Moore, 32 years old, from Conway, Arkansas. Someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who lived and loved and had dreams before someone killed her. William is no longer the man in East Miller's Cove. He's William Thomas Green, born March 29, 1942, from Knoxville. Someone who had a family, a life, a story before he ended up dead in the woods. And viewers respond to that hard, because it reminds us that every Jane Doe and John Doe was a real person, that behind every cold case file is a human being who deserves to be remembered. And that's why these stories perform so well. If you believe every person deserves to be remembered, every victim deserves their name back, and every family deserves closure, then join our community. Hit subscribe and click that notification bell. We're on a mission to tell the stories of the forgotten, the nameless, the erased. Every subscription tells YouTube that these stories matter, that these people matter. Be part of something bigger. Subscribe now. Now we need to talk about the uncomfortable part, because forensic genetic genealogy isn't without controversy. The same method that identifies victims also raises serious privacy questions. Here's the thing. When you submit your DNA to a genealogy website like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA or GDmatch, you're not just sharing your own genetic information. You're sharing information about your relatives, your parents, your siblings, your cousins, people who never consented to having their DNA used for anything. And when law enforcement uses those databases to solve cases, they're accessing information about thousands of people who never agreed to be part of a criminal investigation. Think about it. You take a DNA test to learn about your ancestry. You want to know if you're Irish or Italian or Nigerian. You want to find distant cousins. You want to build your family tree. You don't expect that years later your DNA will be used to identify a murder suspect or to identify a Jane Doe or to connect you to a crime you had nothing to do with. And yet, that's exactly what happens. When investigators search genealogy databases, they're not looking for exact matches. They're looking for partial matches, distant relatives, people who share 5% of their DNA with the unknown person, people who might be third or fourth cousins. And those people had no idea they were becoming part of an investigation. The Department of Justice policy explicitly notes that FGGS requires careful handling of scientific, investigatory, and prosecutorial discretion. Why? Because it's powerful, and because it's invasive. There are safeguards, policies, rules about when and how forensic genetic genealogy can be used, but those policies vary by jurisdiction, and they're constantly evolving. Some people argue that if you voluntarily upload your DNA to a public database, you're accepting the risk that it might be used for purposes you didn't intend, that you're making a choice. But others argue that the average person doesn't understand the implications, that genealogy companies don't make their risks clear enough, that law enforcement is exploiting a loophole. And both sides have valid points. The technique remains controversial, even as it becomes more successful. Because every time it solves a case, it also proves how much power law enforcement has to access genetic information without a warrant, without individual consent, without most people even knowing it's happening. So here's the question you pose to your viewers. If a genealogy-based DNA search could identify Victoria Jean Hargrove after 46 years, Yadizia Jones after nearly 8 years, or Ronald Joe Cole after nearly 60 years, would you support it, even if it raised privacy concerns? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a real engagement prompt, because there's no easy answer. On one hand, you have families who finally got closure. Victoria's family finally knows what happened to her. Yadizia's family can mourn her properly. Ronald's family can lay him to rest with his real name.
Without forensic genetic genealogy, those families would still be waiting, still wondering, still grieving without answers. On the other hand, you have thousands of people whose genetic information was used without their explicit consent. People who took a DNA test for fun and ended up connected to a criminal investigation. So what's more important, solving cold cases or protecting genetic privacy? Your viewers will have strong opinions. Some will say privacy doesn't matter if it helps catch killers and identify victims. Others will say privacy is a fundamental right that shouldn't be violated even for a good cause. And that debate is valuable because it keeps people engaged. It makes them think. It turns your video from entertainment into a conversation. And conversations drive comments. Comments drive engagement. Engagement drives the algorithm. The algorithm drives views. So don't shy away from the controversy. Lean into it. Present both sides fairly and then ask your audience what they think. This is where you come in. We need your voice. Comment below with one of two words: privacy if you think genetic privacy rights are more important, or justice if you think solving murders and identifying victims matters more. No wrong answer, just honest opinions. Let's see where this community stands. Drop your vote in the comments right now. We'll tally the results in our next video.
Here's the conclusion, the big picture takeaway, the thesis statement that ties everything together. The Golden State Killer case opened the public's eyes. It showed the world what forensic genetic genealogy could do. It proved that even the coldest cases, the ones that had gone unsolved for decades, could be cracked with the right technology. But the Golden State Killer was just the beginning. The real ongoing story is what happened afterward. Victoria Jean Hargrove in California and Alabama, Yadesia Jones in Tennessee, Timothy Mitchell Williams in Georgia, Janie Ann Moore in Arkansas, Jeanette Marcotte in Florida and Canada, William Thomas Green in Tennessee, Ronald Joe Cole linking California to Illinois. These aren't suspect cases. These are Jane Does and Jean Does, people who died nameless, people whose families didn't know where they were, people who were forgotten by the system. And one by one, forensic genetic genealogy is bringing them home. That's the story. Not just one big case, but dozens, hundreds, an entire movement of cold cases being reopened, re-examined, and solved. Every month, it seems, there's a new announcement, another Jane Doe identified, another John Doe given his name back, another family finally getting answers. And it's happening across the country, in big cities and small towns, in cases from the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s. The technology works, and it keeps working. Now you close with a forward-looking line, something that positions your channel as the place to follow this ongoing story. As long as forensic genetic genealogy keeps naming the unnamed, this is not a finished story. It is a growing era in cold case history. That line works because it does two things. First, it tells viewers that this isn't over. There will be more cases, more identifications, more stories to tell. So if they want to stay updated, they need to subscribe. Second, it frames this as a historical moment, not just individual cases, but an era, a shift in how cold cases are solved, a revolution in forensic science. And people want to be part of that. They want to witness history. They want to say they were following this story from the beginning. So you end with a call to action. Subscribe to this channel for updates on the latest cold case identifications. Drop a comment telling us which case affected you the most. Share this video with someone who loves true crime. And we'll see you in the next case. Because there will be a next case, and a case after that, and a case after that. As long as there are Jane Does and John Does waiting to be named, there will be stories to tell, and your channel will be there to tell them. Before you go, we need 3 things from you. First, which case hit you the hardest? Victoria? Jamie? Ronald? Comment their name below. Second, smash that subscribe button and turn on all notifications because we drop new cold case breakthroughs every week. Third, share this video. Someone in your life loves true crime and needs to see this. Tag them in the comments or send them the link. Every share helps us grow this community of people who refuse to let the nameless be forgotten. Victoria waited 46 years for her name. How many more are waiting? Let's find them. together. This is Silent Cases. We'll see you in the next one.